So Montana and then Hailey are going to briefly tell you about their projects and what they're looking at here. So Hailey, Montana, I'm gonna pass you the microphone.
Okay.
Here, and if you could just tell us a little bit about the research questions that you're trying to address, and what treatments you implemented here.
I'll start with that. And then you have to be close because you're on the mic. Okay. So these are actually two experimental plots. My plots are this side of that second row of tall posts, and they go back in that direction. And my main questions are about the timing of seeding and what potential effects come from that. So I seeded a diverse mix of 22 species that included some of our obligate wetland plants that we've worked a lot with, and then also some facultative wetland plants and some facultative plants to try to mitigate for early summer drought, which is really rough on tender little seedlings. And yeah, this unit was really dry until maybe the 16th or 17th. My final seeding happened on September 12th. So I seeded once in June, and then once in late August, and once in mid-September. And then shortly after the third seeding, this was reflooded. But you can kind of see down under the water here in some areas, mud cracks. So it got very dry. I was able to go out here in sandals. I initially noticed good germination of Bulbochinus maritimus. The soil was moist and good for germination of seeds in June. But yeah, they died because it was so hot this summer and dry. And then I think maybe you're mostly seeing Kocha or Bassia out here. There's a little bit of Phragmites coming back, but yeah, everything that has the fabric around it on this side of that second row of long posts, that was seeded in September, and we'll just have to wait and see how that does next year.
I'm going to add two quick things.
So part of this was looking at the best timing of seeding, right? So often seeding is in the early summer, but with these hotter, drier summers, could these fall seedings that Montana is also looking at, maybe they will lead to higher plant establishment? That's part of the question here. And then Montana, you have a second site at Howard Slough where there has been consistent water the whole year. Can you tell us how of your 22 species mix did you get a lot of species germinating, and was there anything exciting happening at that site?
In terms of species.
So in terms of species at the Howard Slough site, which had consistent water throughout the summer, I did see some establishment of Disticlus spicata, so saltgrass. And then, some surprises. We had a couple Treglocken maritima show up. And then Bulbochinus did well.
Alkali bulrush.
Alkali bulrush, yeah. You can definitely see a difference between the seeded and unseeded plots. Yeah, so again, all the seed that I used was dormancy broken, which is in contrast to part of Hailey's questions.
Okay, why don't we pass it on? Okay.
So Hailey will tell us about her project now. Hailey, if you could start off telling us what your main research question was and what your different treatments were.
Yeah, so the main research question that I'm looking at is how we can improve the outcomes of seed-based revegetation in the future and within certain water conditions from year to year. So the treatments in my field experiment are comparing a mix of these workhorse species that we've been talking about to 3 different other treatments that aim to hedge our bets against uncertain water levels. So the workhorse species mix is using 5 species commonly used in restoration. So that's using saltgrass, Arctic rush, hardstem bulrush, alkali bulrush, and 3-square bulrush. And then the bed hedging treatments are all using a mix of 22 species. It's the same species mix that Montana is using. And that mix encompasses plant community, emergent, meadow, and playa plant communities, which all have different hydrologic requirements. So the logic behind this more diverse mix is that regardless of what your water conditions are like in that year, something within the mix is going to germinate and hopefully establish, because all these species have different requirements. So 2 of the treatments here are also looking at delayed timing of seeding. So one of these is a delayed germination treatment in which half of the seeds in this diverse mix were treated to break dormancy, but the other half wasn't. And this is a way to kind of build up the seed bank and mitigate against potentially unfavorable water levels when you initially seed, because some of the seeds are not going to be germinating right away. And then the other treatment is a multi-year sowing treatment. So this was half the quantity of seeds was put out this year, and the other half will be put out next year, but both of these are treated to break dormancy. So it's more control over when these are germinating because the dormancy is broken, whereas in the delayed germination, we're just waiting and seeing what will come up next year.
Great. Could you tell me about any surprises here or at Howard Slough?
Yeah, so like Montana said, the conditions here were pretty dry. One species that has persisted over the summer is golden dock, or Rumex maritimus. That's an annual forb that's performed well in past experiments with the lab. At Howard Slough, I've had a great number of species appear from our mix, which is very exciting. 2 of note are pickleweed and Perch seepweed, or Sueda calceoliformis. Those are actually playa species, so they're typically found in drier environments. But Howard Slough, our experimental area, is very saturated. We had several inches of water on the soil surface for multiple weeks through the growing season. So I found it interesting that those were able to establish and persist through the whole season in those conditions. And I think the
Should mention Biden's.
the most sorry.
Sorry, did I just distract you?
Anyway, yeah, so we've had species coming up in that experiment that previously we haven't used in the lab before, so that's been very exciting.
Can you mention beggar's tick? Is that what you're trying to ask her?
Yes. The most prolific species that has come up in my experiments, or in my experiment at Howard Slough, is the genus is Bidens, multiple species of beggar's tick. A lot of my sampling plots have over 30 to 40% cover of Bidens. It establishes very quickly, so I think that because it's able to reach like a more mature plant stage earlier in the season, it's more tolerant of less favorable hydrologic conditions later in the season, which would explain why it's been able to persist.
Right, so that beggar's tick, that Bidens, we've also found it to do very well competing against Phragmites in experiments. So, and it's got yellow showy flowers, so it's a great pollinator species. So we talked this morning about these trade-offs and these different approaches for revegetation, and one of the biggest things with seeding is that we need to cover vast scales for revegetation, right? And there's still so many uncertainties, and mortality is so high, and so that's what we're really trying to target. How can we reduce that mortality? Can we sow at different times, like Montana's talking about? Is it better to only break dormancy in half the seeds, or do we need to be sowing across multiple years? These are the kinds of things we're trying to figure out. We've had fantastic collaborations with DWR, Forestry Fire State Lands, Fish and Wildlife Service, many of you here, and that our research is really aimed at trying to improve the land management practices. So anyway, with that, I think we are done with the field tour portion today. Thank you all so much for coming.